Stories about America to read aloud. Number 4, Mr. Two Guns' Stagecoach. Betsy sat under the cottonwood tree in old Mr. Two Guns' front yard and wondered sadly what was going to become of her, because Betsy was a stagecoach, and nobody needs stagecoaches nowadays. A long time ago, when the United States was young, people who wanted to take a trip went by stagecoach. Now they ride in automobiles or buses or in trains or planes. Mr. Two Gun was a nice man and Betsy's friend, but soon he was moving to an apartment where there was no front yard for Betsy, and who else would give her a home? Now Betsy was a real stagecoach. She was almost 100 years old, and oh, the stories she could tell about those long ago days on the western plains when she used to carry passengers and mail all the way from Missouri to California. Betsy could make the 3,000-mile trip in 3 weeks. That was in the time before railroads crossed the country. In all the West, there were only bumpy wagon roads to travel on. Of course, Betsy was pulled by a team of 6 mules. The mules were strong, but they often got tired. So Betsy's driver, sitting high on the driver's box with the mail pouch under his feet, would stop at a stage station to change teams. But Betsy didn't get tired. Her big wooden body rocked back and forth across the rough trail, and her big wooden wheels went clappity-clap through the dust or mud. But she didn't get tired. Inside the coach, Betsy's passengers got both tired and scared. Sometimes there were 9 or 10 people crowded onto Betsy's hard wooden seats, with their luggage tied on top of her flat roof. The passengers didn't get much sleep, and they only got to eat when the mules were tired and Betsy stopped at a stage station. And the people were always afraid of prairie fires or outlaws or Indian attacks. The driver kept a sharp lookout, and he carried a gun. Betsy didn't get tired, and she wasn't afraid. She was proud of her job carrying passengers in the United States mail all the way across the West to the Pacific Ocean, through rain and heat and snow and dust. All day and all night, Betsy would jolt over the bumpy roads. For years and years, that's what she did. Then men laid the railroad across the West. People could ride more comfortably in trains than in Betsy. Trains could carry the mail faster than any team of mules could run. Nobody needed Betsy anymore. Oh, they put her in a shed and left her there. Oh, but it was dark and lonesome in that shed, and so quiet. Once a family of little gray mice built a nest on one of Betsy's seats, and so for a while she had company. But the mice moved away when winter came. Betsy had to stay in that shed for a long, long time. She grew old there, and her wood dried and became warped and twisted. Her wheels began to wobble. The driver's box started to sag. The curtains that flapped in her narrow windows crumbled and fell off. Then one day Mr. Two Gun, who had once been a Western sheriff, took her home to the cottonwood tree in his front yard. The neighborhood children came to play on Betsy. They climbed up on the driver's box and pretended they were driving a team of 6 mules. They sat on the roof and pretended they were keeping a sharp watch for outlaws. Tourists driving along the highway in front of Mr. Two Gun's house would see Betsy and stop their cars and come into the yard for a closer look. Students from the college on the hill would visit her too. Betsy loved all the people and the excitement. She thought it was just wonderful under the cottonwood tree. But now Mr. Two Gun was moving, and there was no place for Betsy to go. Mr. Two Gun asked the next-door neighbor, Mrs. Parker, if she would keep Betsy, but Mrs. Parker said, "Oh, no, I can't keep her. The children playing with her would wear out my nice grass." He asked the neighbor across the street, Mrs. Thixton, if she would keep Betsy. But Mrs. Thixton said, "Oh, no, I can't keep her. The tourists make too much noise. I'd never get any sleep." He asked the garage man if there was room in his garage for Betsy, but the garage man said, "No, I need my garage for cars." He asked Farmer Williams if there was room in his barn, but Farmer Williams said, "No, I need my barn for cows." "Maybe," said Mr. Two Gun to Betsy, "I could find a shed out in the country for you." When Betsy heard that, she began to tremble. She creaked and rattled as if she were going to fall to pieces any minute. Mr. Two Gun thought it was the wind blowing that made poor Betsy shake so hard, but it wasn't the wind. It was because Betsy was thinking, "Oh, not a shed again, so dark and lonesome. Why, I'd never see anybody. Everybody would forget me and I'd just fall to pieces. Then someday somebody would open the shed and see my old wooden boards on the ground, and they'd chop me up for firewood." No wonder Betsy was trembling so much. "Well," said Mr. Two Gun, "the circus is in town. Maybe they'd like to have you for their Wild West show, and you could be in the parades." Betsy liked that idea, but before she could stop trembling, Mr. Two Gun looked at her and shook his head. "No," he said, "listen to you rattling. They wouldn't want you. You're too old and worn out. Circus life is hard, all that moving from town to town. You'd break down and they'd leave you behind in some junkyard." Betsy was only a stagecoach, but if stagecoaches could cry, Betsy would have cried great big stagecoach tears. "Isn't there any place for me?" she thought sadly. Mr. Two Gun was looking sad too. "It doesn't seem right, Betsy," he said slowly. "Children read about stagecoaches like you in their history books, yet here you are, the real thing, and nobody wants you." All at once Mr. Two Gun had a wonderful idea. "Why didn't I think of it before?" he exclaimed. "Of course! Why, of course, Betsy! Do you know what you are? You're history!" Mr. Two Gun hurried away toward the college on the hill. Soon he came back, and with him came a group of college boys. To Betsy's surprise, the boys took hold of her gently and slowly, carefully. They rolled her right up the hill to the college, inside a cheery brick building, and parked her in the very center of a big sunny room. For what Mr. Two Gun had said was true. Betsy was history, real history, and at the college there was a museum of historical things, old guns, stone arrowheads. Mr. Two Gun's idea had been to tell the college people about Betsy, and as soon as they learned that she needed a new home, they wanted her for the museum. So now Betsy was going to live in the museum, and she would never be lonely again. Instead, she would be busy and proud, as she had been 100 years ago when she was carrying passengers and mail. For now, Betsy had a new and important job to do, to show all the people who visited the museum what a real stagecoach looked like, and to carry on the wonderful history of the American West.